Welcome to the London Commercial Offices podcast with me, your host, Steve Berridge, Managing Director at Fidgens Cost Management. This is a podcast where we share the stories, career paths, lessons and insights from some of the industry's most influential people. Anything contained within our podcast should not be considered professional advice, and if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe or follow buttons to ensure you don't miss any of the amazing guests we've got coming up. It also really helps us grow the show. Thanks. Today I'm speaking with Ella Smith, a building performance analyst at AHMM Architects. We're going to be talking about her recent publication, Fit Out Rip Out, which looks at the hidden carbon costs in Cat A fit outs over the life of a building. The aim of the study being to shine a spotlight on the need for radical change within the speculative office market. Ella, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Firstly, before we get into your study, it'll be great to get a little insight into you and your background, how you got started in the industry, a little about your role at AHMM, and then ultimately that can lead into what drove you to start researching this particular topic, if that's all right.
Yeah. So, as you said, I'm a building performance analyst at AHMM. We are an architecture practice. I work in sort of a specialist team within that practice, the building performance team. We're an in-house specialist looking at various aspects of sustainability across all of our projects. We feed in with bits of analysis and strategic thinking to try and further the sustainable agendas of our projects. I've been in the team for about 2.5 years now. I actually joined from one of our architectural teams. So my background is architecture. The thing that I find particularly interesting about this role at AHMM is the interlinking nature of our role in the building performance team and the architectural decisions being made and the sort of back and forth communication to better our building performance.
What part of the business were you in beforehand in terms of architecture? Was that interiors or was that more new build?
So I did primarily some retrofit projects and office projects, new build. This report is sort of my first foray into the fit out world. It wasn't from my personal experience that I decided that this was a thing that we wanted to look into. The question actually came from a director in our practice who was asking whether we had any data on the carbon cost of speculative fit out. They were looking at the potential carbon costs of putting a speculative fit out in their project. We sort of said, actually, no, we don't have data and it doesn't look like anybody really does. Exactly. Yeah. So that was the driver and we sort of took it from there really.
And how long ago was that when you started that from our perspective, how long it takes to do a report like you've done, but was it months ago?
I think it was about 14 months ago we got asked the initial question. Yeah, quite a while. It's been a lot of work. We sort of done it on and off along with other projects. We did kind of think at the start, so say at the end of last year, we thought, maybe this report has sort of missed the boat. Maybe this wasteful practice of speculative fit out being constantly ripped out isn't happening anymore. Maybe people have realised that this isn't a great thing to do.
No, definitely still happens.
On multiple instances, we've seen that happening. So we hope that this has come at a prudent time when we're really trying to hit these ambitious carbon targets across the industry. And this is just another piece of information that our project teams need to further those ambitions.
Excellent. So the report, for people that don't know, and we'll put a link in the show notes, is Fit Out Rip Out, and it's a study on the carbon cost of Cat A. And as you said, you thought you might have missed the boat because there has been a big drive over the past, let's call it a year, in terms of embodied carbon, RCS whole life cost assessments. So people are looking at it. But I think the interesting thing about your report is it doesn't take away from the work that's being done. What it does is shine a spotlight on perhaps current inefficiencies or gaps within the modelling and the understanding and the approach that people are taking currently. And I think that particularly, having gone through it today again, is about looking at how we separate Cat A embodied carbon from the base build embodied carbon when you're doing a new building and how you report against that. But then also not looking at it as a one-off installation of Cat A, but looking at it over the life cycle of a building. And in actual fact, the amount of times that you're going to have a tenant change within that life cycle and the eventual rip out and reinstatement of Cat A's as part of DLAPs and throughout that process. And it's about trying to look at ways to minimise that embodied carbon over the life cycle of the building. In terms of then just, I say, digging into a bit more detail about your study, where would you like to start?
I suppose start at the beginning. The initial idea behind the report was to look at the upfront carbon emissions, actually. What we wanted to do was compare different designs of Cat A fit out. So we've taken 4 real projects from AHMM AHMM designs, and we've compared them like for like, which I think doesn't often get in a live project, because the Cat A is sort of born out of the type of building that is built. So you wouldn't often find the comparison between these types of fit out in one space. That was our initial thought. And then we started to think about how each of these types of fit out, how sort of at risk they were, or how sensitive they might be to tenants coming in and essentially ripping them out. So that was where we came up with the definition of like at risk and baked in elements within a fit out. So we hope that going forwards, design teams can now start to consider, whilst they're designing their Cat A or while they're coming up with the whole building strategy, because, you know, Cat A is, whilst it is a separate thing, it's totally interlinked with the type of building that you're building, and once one type of fit out has been designed in, it's very difficult to then try and put something else in. You know, for example, if you were going to go for underfloor ventilation, there's all sorts of core building services that need to be catered to that type of strategy, and once it's in, it's in.
I think for people listening at home, if you can access the report, what is useful is, as I said, you've looked at 4 different fit out options in terms of Cat A, and that ranges from a substantial through to a subtle, and substantial being full supply air delivered, high level ductwork and fan core units, suspended ceiling, services and sprinklers, ranging right the way down to a subtle approach, which is high level supply air only combined with openable windows. So your report is useful in a way that it helps you assess the Cat A against those 4, but then goes a step deeper to look at, okay, looking at those, what would you consider to be at risk and what would you consider to be baked in? And it's about trying to move the current approach to essentially having more items in the baked in scenario than at risk, meaning that, you know, when there are those eventual tenant changes throughout the life cycle of a building, the baked in items essentially can be reused as opposed to ripped out and replaced, therefore reducing the embodied carbon. Is that the correct kind of assessment?
That's pretty much spot on. So yeah, the sort of definition that we gave it was whatever is baked in is fundamentally incredibly flexible or literally baked into the base build. So in the subtle example, that building has concrete core cooling. So in the soffit there is chilled pipework that tempers the space, and that is part of their cooling strategy. So no one's going to be able to come in and rip that out. They're stuck with it, whether they like it or not. It was trying to think about what elements, essentially aren't flexible and what might need to be ripped out to suit somebody else's design. You know, the whole point of fit out is that you get a bespoke space that works for whichever company is in that space. We need to make sure that what we're putting in can suit all of these different types of companies. I suppose going for a subtle approach is one design solution that we think is sort of minimizing the Cat A that's less flexible, let's say. Equally, the substantial version, the subtle version, might not necessarily suit every business. It's not a one design fits all situation. So in some situations, you might need to put a substantial fit out in. Really, the issue isn't whether you have subtle or whether you have substantial, because then when you think about whole life carbon, of course, the subtle fit out isn't going to fit every business need. And, you know, having conversations with agents, we've been told that isn't flexible enough for some businesses. So in some situations, a substantial approach is probably more favourable. In theory, that's sort of okay. It's when we then start to look at repeated tenant turnover over the life of a building and the sort of incredibly wasteful rip out of these elements. So if a substantial fit out was kept in place until the end of its service life, then I think that's totally fine, and I think that's a great solution.
And I suppose that the embodied carbon within that has been accounted for as part of the initial upfront RCS whole life assessment.
Exactly.
You captured that.
Yeah. The problem isn't the substantial fit out in itself. It's the wasteful actions over the life of a building that are making it a problematic solution. In the substantial version, you've got suspended ceilings, you've got fan coil units, you've got ductwork, light fittings that could all be very easily ripped out and replaced over and over and over, adding to the total carbon. But if a tenant came in and actually it was all taken down carefully and it was all stored and it was refurbished and it was put back in place in whatever new configuration was needed, then I think that's equally a fantastic solution. Like, it's not one or the other, it's the sort of cumulative actions that are important. So the circular economy is also a massively important factor in this. And as designers, we need to be designing something that is flexible and easy to adapt. And if it can't be adapted, then it needs to be demounted and able to be reused over and over, and needs to be able to work to all of these different needs.
No, that's really interesting. We had Steve Gilchrist on a previous episode, and he's very passionate about the circular economy. And I think it's the circular steel function that he runs. And it was very interesting to the point he's actually now part of, I think it's I want to say Danish startup. I could have got that wrong, but it's essentially a materials reuse exchange. So it's about this circular economy, but not just within one building, but it's if you're taking down that suspended ceiling and it can be reused, giving other clients access to that product to ensure that it's being reused within the industry so that you're not losing that embodied carbon. You're taking it and you're putting it into another building.
Exactly. Yeah. These are like very high value pieces of kit when you start to think about the carbon locked up in them. Yeah, it's about we need to make the most use out of them.
Absolutely. So in terms of, how long ago was it this report was published? Try and look at the date on it.
So we published at the start of March.
And what's the feedback been from the market so far?
We've had really positive feedback. We've had a lot of people getting in touch. We finished the report saying this report has come to a finish, but we think that this is the start of the conversation and we really want to keep this conversation going. We've sort of highlighted the issue. We haven't necessarily found all of the solutions because this is an incredibly complex model, and we understand that all the issues are interconnected, like the marketing of the space, how quickly you can get tenants in, what tenants are after. The energy that we're getting back from it is people are really interested in this design problem, I guess. We're speaking to different designers who are also trying to understand this problem and find ways out of it from a design perspective. We're speaking to really interested clients who are thinking, how can they look at their briefs differently? How can they foster a different sort of economy around Cat A fit out that can unlock a whole different sort of element of business? Speaking to agents, looking at how we can sell the story of what we're doing.
It's about helping change that mindset. I think there's obviously an agent bias to having a nice Cat A space for obvious reasons. And there are benefits if, having a lease signed up, sold quickly is the primary driver, then you can't argue that. But I think it's about taking a step back and having the developers buy into bigger strategy. A lot of developers are banging the drum in terms of how sustainable they are. But I think if that is the case, then as you've put it, the Cat A is out the bag. Once a spotlight has been shone on the issue of, the number of essentially Cat A fit outs that the building goes through in its life cycle and the wastefulness in terms of embodied carbon that entails, you can't in good conscience then just continue to pump out Cat A fit outs for new speculative office developments, especially when you've got the advancement of other ways of marketing spaces, VR, Cat A plus, plug and play, Cat B for some examples with the serviced office sector. As you said, there are a lot of push and pulls that are going into that decision process. That's really interesting. In terms of if anybody wanted to, as you left it in your report, continued the conversation, how best would they get in touch with you guys?
Get in touch via LinkedIn. We're on there. We've got a link to our email address in the report. So we're very happy to hear from anybody in the industry that's interested and wants to talk. We're hoping to take this further and try and organise maybe some sort of round table or try and get lots of people from different areas of the industry in the room to try and further the conversation and start to figure out some solutions and maybe work out what our next research project is going to be. We think this is important. This is just the start, I think.
Perfect. Listen, okay, what we'll do is we will include a link to the report in the show notes, and we'll also pop your LinkedIn profile and email in there. So if there is anyone interested in picking up the conversation, whether that's developers, agents, end users, designers, they can reach out and get in touch, and particularly if they're interested in joining your roundtable, put themselves forward. Thank you ever so much for coming on the show. Really enjoyed it. So one thing we like to ask all our guests is kind of their prediction for the next 12 months. And that could be around things that you think are going to happen, perhaps things that should happen, or perhaps things that you think you'd like to happen but won't necessarily happen. What that means is that in a year's time, we can get you back on the show and we can reflect on your thoughts from a year ago and what's happened over that previous 12 months. So next 12 months.
Yes. I think what I'd really like to see is some project test cases. We need to see how we can try and put some of this thinking into real case projects and see. I'm sure there'll be many other issues that we find on the way. So it's only through, applying this to projects that we're going to move forwards. And that's essentially what we're after. I don't know if that's ambitious, if in 12 months I'm going to come back and say, God, that was really hard. But I think that would be my positive outlook for the next 12 months.
Okay. Well, I look forward to discussing it in 12 months' time. Look, thanks ever so much for coming on the show. Really enjoyed it. As I say, anyone that wants to pick up the conversation with Ella, contact details will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for having me.
This podcast is sponsored by Fidgins, a London-based cost consultancy. Please visit fidgins.co.uk to find out more about our market-leading service and some of the amazing clients we get to work with. We're super open to guest recommendations for this podcast, so if there's anyone in the industry you'd like to get on the show, please visit the website or send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll try to make it happen. Thanks, and bye for now.